"I've got a spare room," he said, "and nothing you'd have to earn." The record book lay open on the Grange Hall table, 9 years of rainfall in her own cramped hand, the pages soft at the corners from being carried. She was 33 years old, and by the first snow she had sold the last quilt her mother ever stitched across the mercantile counter for flour money. Nothing of that woman left in the house now but the way Priscilla Yardley folded a sheet. 2 younger siblings depending on what her needle could bring in, and a traveling preacher in town for one season, building his following the cheap way by picking a name from the pulpit and letting the congregation do the rest. What is a quiet man really offering when he offers a room and asks for nothing back? And what was she more afraid of, the hunger or being seen as a woman who took what she had not earned? Tell me where you are listening from tonight and whether you have ever been the one they talked about. If this story pulls you in, drop a comment and tell me the exact moment you first felt it turned between them. Everyone picks a different one, and I love that. 4 winters before the record book ever lay open on that Grange Hall table, Priscilla Yardley sat in a rented pew at the back of a city church in St. Louis and learned what a seat costs. Pew rent in that church ran on a sliding scale like everything else. The front 8 rows went to men with names on buildings. The middle went to clerks and their wives. The last 2 rows, hard against the vestibule where the cold came in every time the door swung, went for 40 cents a quarter, and that was the only seat a widow with debts could still afford. Her mother paid it in coin counted out on the kitchen table and never once let herself be late with it. They sang the same hymns back there as they did up front. Priscilla noticed that early. Same hymns, same sermon, same God. Only the draft was different. She was 29 then. She did not yet know she would be 33 and 900 miles west in a town called Split Rock in Idaho Territory, selling the last thing her mother's hands ever made. Her people had come up on a homestead near a fort, a lean quarter section of sage and wind, where her father hauled hay and oats to the garrison and kept the tally himself because nobody else would. Priscilla kept it with him. She was small enough that she had to stand on a crate at the counter, and she learned there that numbers are not clever and not cruel. They simply are. Bushels in, bushels signed for. What was promised set beside what came. If the 2 did not agree, one of them was a lie, and it was never the column. Her father died of a thing the doctor called pleurisy, and the neighbors called February. Her mother sold the homestead to cover his paper, and it was not quite enough, which is how a woman ends up in the back row of a city church. Then her mother died too, and left behind 2 children still growing and 1 quilt, and Priscilla brought them all west, because west was the only direction that did not cost money to face. Split Rock in the year she turned 33 was 61 buildings, 1 land office, 1 chechum, and office, 1 Grange Hall, 1 bridge over the ravine, and a church that shared its roof beams with the schoolhouse. She took in mending, washing when there was washing, piecework quilting for women who had bolts of cloth and no patience, and she did it well enough that they came back, and cheap enough that they did not thank her for it. 14 months of that. She could put a straight seam in a work shirt by lamplight with her eyes half closed. Her younger brother was 14, and her younger sister was 11, and what came in through her needle was what they ate. Then the first snow came early, on a Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon. She had 4 pounds of flour in the house, and a bill at the mercantile she had already been carried on twice. There is a particular arithmetic a woman does at a kitchen table at midnight, and Priscilla did it, and every road she ran, the numbers down came out at the same place, folded in paper on the shelf above the stove. Her mother's quilt, 9-patch, turkey red and indigo, quilted at 8 stitches to the inch by a woman who had done it evenings after washing other people's clothes all day. The only object left in the world that had been touched every day for 2 years by hands Priscilla could still remember the weight of. She carried it to the mercantile on Wednesday morning with the snow crusted in the wagon ruts and her breath going up white. Verna Kittredge kept the counter. Verna had a way of looking at a thing and then looking at you, and letting the second look last longer than the first. She unfolded the quilt across the varnished counter, ran a thumb over the binding, and said the market for used bedding was thin, and there was a smell of wood smoke in it, and that she could go $3.25 credit against the account, which was more than she ought to do. Priscilla said, "Cash, please." If you can, Verna could. She counted it out slow, so that anyone standing behind in line would have time to see it counted. The coins came into Priscilla's palm cold. That was the thing she would remember. Not Verna's face, and not the words, just how cold the money was, colder than the air, cold the way a doorknob is cold, and how she closed her hand around it and said thank you in a voice that came out perfectly level. Inside, she was standing in a kitchen in another state, watching a woman thread a needle by the window because the lamp oil had to last. Outside, she bought 50 pounds of flour and a half-pound of lard and asked for the bill on the account to be marked down $2, and Verna marked it and said, "Well, there is a mercy." Priscilla said, "There is." She meant nothing by it. Verna took it to mean something, and by Sunday the sentence going around Split Rock was that the Yardley girl had sold her dead mother's quilt for cash rather than settle her honest debt like a Christian, and had been short with Verna Kittredge about it besides. That is how a town does it. Not with a mob, not with a notice nailed up, just a sentence, passed hand to hand, wearing smooth like a coin. Alton Fry was a deacon, and the man who set the collection plate going, and after the singing that Sunday, he did not hand her the plate. He passed it to the woman on her right, and then reached back over Priscilla's shoulder to take it again. It took perhaps 3 seconds. She sat with her gloves in her lap and her spine straight and understood that she had been shown something and that she was expected to understand it, and that saying one word about it would be the same as agreeing she was worth saying it to. So she sang the closing hymn, all 4 verses, and she walked home the long way, across the footbridge over the ravine, because the long way had nobody on it. She had been going out of her way to that bridge for months, and if you had asked her why, she would have said it was shorter to the Dunphy place where she picked up mending, which was not true. The ravine ran 30 feet deep behind the church lots, dry in August, loud with runoff in April. The footbridge across it was 4 planks and a rail, and it had gone out in the June flood and been standing again by the end of the same week. New stringers, new rail, nobody's name on it, no bill sent to the town. She had seen him working on it once. From up the slope, at a distance, a man in a hat kneeling on a plank with his coat off in the heat, driving nails with 3 strokes each. She had counted them without meaning to, 3 strokes, every nail. He never varied it. That was Luther Duffy. He was 36 years old. He ran cattle on the flat east of the ravine. He wore his hat indoors and out, and he came to town when he needed to and not otherwise. He had a beard going gray at one corner of the chin, earlier than it should have. He said hello to men and nodded to women, and that was the whole of his public life. On the Wednesday of the quilt, Priscilla had 50 pounds of flour in a sack and a bundle of mending in a flour sack tote, and she had misjudged herself. She got the flour to the bridge and stopped because she could not carry both and hold the rail, and the planks that day had a skin of ice on them. She was standing at the ravine end with her arms burning when she heard boots on the far side. The planks took his weight, and the bridge answered it, a low knock she felt come up through her own soles, through her ankles, into her knees. That was the second thing she would remember about that week. Cold coins and the shudder of a bridge under someone else's step. He came across, stopped 6 feet short of her, looked at the sack and nodded at her. "Bridge won't hold 2 with a load," he said. Then he picked the flower up off the ground and put it on his shoulder and went back the way he had come, up the grade toward her house, without waiting to be told which one it was. She followed with the mending. She did not thank him going up, because he was 20 feet ahead, and it would have been shouted. He set the sack inside her door on the dry boards, touched the brim of his hat, and was gone down the slope before she got her scarf off. No questions, no pity, just those 5 words. She stood in her own doorway a while with the door open and the cold coming in, which she could not afford, and she did not know what she was doing standing there. Another small thing she noticed, later that same evening, the plank at the ravine end of that bridge, the one that had been split since October and that she had stepped over 100 times, was not split anymore. It was new wood, pale, unweathered, 3 nail heads at each end. She had no proof he had done it. She filed it with the other things she had no proof of. That week, the surveyor came through and word went around that new plats would be posted at the land office. That same week, a traveling revival preacher named Otis Pemberton put up a canvas at the edge of town and told the congregation on his first Sunday that he had come to Split Rock for 1 season only, and that God had shown him already what was wrong with it. Priscilla was in the back row. She had chosen the back row herself this time, out of habit, out of 40 cents a quarter learned by heart in another state. She thought she was safe there. Act 2, the ritual. Otis Pemberton kept a small book. Men saw it and thought it was scripture notes. It was names. He wrote them at the plank table in the back of Alton Fry's kitchen, where he took his supper, because a revival preacher does not pay for board in a town that wants saving, and he wrote slowly, the way a man writes when he intends to read it aloud later. He asked questions the way a buyer asks about a horse. Who is behind on their accounts? Who has been carried? Who came here from somewhere and would not say why? He did not ask them all at once. He asked 1 question a day of a different person each time and let the town assemble the answer for him and hand it over free. Verna Kittredge told him about a quilt, but that was the canvas at the edge of town, and Priscilla Yardley did not go to the canvas, and for a while the 2 things ran along beside each other without touching. What ran alongside her instead was Saturday. The first Saturday came 6 days after the flower. She was at the table with a work shirt across her knees, the cuff gone through at the fold, and she heard a horse stop out front and not come closer. Boots. A knock that was 3 strokes, the same count he gave a nail. Luther Duffy stood on her step with a bundle under his arm and his hat on. "Heard you take in mending," he said. She said she did. He held the bundle out. She took it. Their fingers almost touched across the twine. Almost. Inside the bundle were 4 shirts, 2 pair of drawers, a coat with the lining torn loose at the shoulder, and a pair of canvas trousers worn white at the knee. She spread them on the table and looked at them the way she looked at everything now, in money. 2 hours. Maybe 3 if she did the coat right. He was still on the step. He had not come in and had not asked to. She said, "You can wait inside, it's cold." He came in and stood by the door with his hat on and did not sit until she put a chair out with her foot. Then he sat, and she poured coffee because there was coffee, barely, and he drank it and said it was good coffee, which was a lie and a kind one, and he paid her before she had done any work at all. 50 cents, he said. Is that fair? It was too much. It was nearly twice fair. She had a whole sentence built and ready about how she would take a quarter now and a quarter when the work was done, and how she did not want to be carried, not by him and not by anybody, and how she had watched what being carried does to a woman's name in a town like this. She said, "That's fair." Inside, she was counting the coins in her palm and thinking about how they were warm. He came the next Saturday, too. Another small thing she noticed, the bundle was not honestly the size of a week. There were only so many shirts a man living alone could ruin in 7 days, and by the second Saturday, she had already put her needle through most of them once. Yet the bundle came the same weight every time, and when she opened it, she found the same shirts back, with new, small damages in them. A button pulled, a seam opened at the shoulder, a cuff frayed in a way a cuff does not fray on its own. He was wearing his clothes out on purpose so that there would be work. She sat with that for a long while after he left, holding a shirt with a button gone and the thread ends still clean where they had been broken rather than worn. She did not say anything about it. Saying it would end it. There are gifts you can only accept by not naming them, and she had learned in a back row pew in St. Louis exactly how much of a person's dignity fits inside the space of a thing unsaid. So the Saturdays went on. October turned. The cottonwoods along the ravine went yellow all at once, and then went bare in one windy night, and the mornings came up hard and white on the water bucket. Her brother, who was 14, took to watching for the horse from the window without admitting he was watching. Her sister, who was 11, took to setting out the third cup before anybody asked her to. The order of it settled into something you could set a clock by. He arrived between 9 and past. He knocked 3 times. He handed over the bundle. He sat where the chair was put for him and drank 1 cup of coffee and no more. And he answered questions if they were asked and did not start any of his own. He paid 50 cents, always in coin, always counted out onto the table rather than into her hand, so that no part of it looked like alms. And every Saturday before he left, he fixed one thing. He never announced it. That was the whole method of the man. The first was the door. The latch had been catching since summer, so that the door had to be lifted with a knee and slammed, and she had gotten so used to slamming her own door that she no longer heard herself do it. He was on his way out, and he stopped in the frame, took the latch in his hand, worked it twice. Then he went to his horse and came back with a screwdriver from the saddlebag and knelt and turned 3 screws and rehung the strike plate 1/2 inch lower, and the door shut with a click. Then he touched his hat and rode down the grade. That night she opened and closed her own door 4 times just to hear it. The second was the step. The third was the stovepipe, which had a joint gone loose and had been smoking her out all fall, and which he pulled apart and wired and put back with his hands black to the wrist. She brought him water and a rag. He took the rag. Their fingers almost touched. Almost. The fourth was the woodpile, and the woodpile was where she nearly broke. She came around the corner of the house one Saturday afternoon after he had gone and found the pile squared up, front face flat, the split pieces sorted from the rounds, and about 1.5 ricks more of it than there had been at breakfast. Not from her land. She had no trees. The wood had come in on a pack horse she never heard arrive, and it had been stacked so that the smallest kindling sat where an 11-year-old girl could reach it without climbing. Priscilla stood in the cold with her hands in her apron and let herself be angry for about 11 seconds, because anger was cleaner than the other thing. Then she went inside and wrote in her book, in the column where she kept what she owed people, 1 line, L. Duffy, wood, cannot price. She had kept books since she was a child. That was the part of her nobody in Split Rock knew. On the homestead near the fort, when she was small enough to need a crate to see over the counter, she had stood beside her father while he weighed hay for the garrison, and she had learned the shape of an honest column. Bushels in, bushels signed for, promised on one side, delivered on the other, and the two either agreed or one of them was a lie. Quartermaster clerks who had gone to schools she would never see used to check her figures and then stopped checking them. She was 11 the first time a lieutenant took her total over his own man's. Nobody here had ever asked her whether she could add. Women who took in washing were not asked that. So she kept books for herself, out of habit and out of something like faith. Every account she owed, every account owed to her. And in the same crate, wrapped in oilcloth, a thicker book, 9 years deep, in which she had written down the rainfall. She had started it on the homestead because her father wanted to know when the hay would come in. She had kept it because a person who has lost a house learns to hold on to the kind of property that cannot be sold at a counter. Inches, dates, first frost, last frost, the day the ravine ran, and the day it quit. In her own cramped hand, 9 years of weather, carried 900 miles in a crate with the flour. Her brother asked her once what good it was. She said, "None yet." November came in wet and then froze. The Saturdays held. She began to measure the week from one to the next, and she did not examine why. Why hadn't she told him a quarter was enough? Why did she put the good cup out, the one with no chip, and put it out early and move it twice? She did not examine that either. There was too much else to carry, and some questions you set on a shelf and leave. Another small thing she noticed. He never took off his hat, and he never sat with his back to the door, and when her sister talked, he listened all the way to the end of it, even the long parts, even the parts about a cat. Men did not do that. Men waited for a child to finish. Another small thing she noticed. He said her name once a visit. Not more. Miss Yardley, on the way in. Never at the table, never on the way out. As though he had allowed himself exactly one and was rationing. Another small thing she noticed. He came in the cold months in a coat with a torn lining, week after week, and she had mended that lining twice, and it kept coming back torn. The first Saturday in December, it was 14 below at sunup, and the wind had the snow moving sideways up the grade. She had told herself he would not come, and had told herself twice more while the coffee went cold, and then the horse was at the fence. He came in white to the shoulders with ice in his beard, and the bundle under his coat where it would stay dry. She said, "You should not have ridden in this." He said, "Horse likes it." He stood by the stove and steamed. She hung his coat and found the pockets weighted, and it was not right to look, but she looked, because a woman who feeds 3 people learns to look. 2 tins of peaches, a twist of paper with sugar in it, a packet of needles, the sharps, size 9, the good English kind that cost more than she would ever have paid for herself. He did not mention them. He drank his 1 cup and paid his 50 cents and went out and knocked the ice off the pump handle and left. The tins were on the table when she got back inside. The needles were beside them, not handed over, not offered, just set down where a person would find them, so that no thanks would be required and no debt could be entered. She entered it anyway. Her book, that line, cannot price. The bridge went out the second time on the 9th of December. It was not a flood. It was ice and a warm afternoon and the weight of a wet snow, and the west stringer cracked at the bank and dropped the whole span 3 feet, so that the 4 planks hung down into the ravine at an angle like a broken wing. Priscilla found it Monday morning on her way to the Dunphy place with a load of mending, and she stood on the lip of it in the cold and looked down 30 feet at the rocks and understood that her walk to work was now 1.25 miles around by the road. She went around by the road 4 days. On Friday she came up the grade in the last of the light and heard hammering. He was down in it, coat off in the cold. New stringers laid, cut and notched and dragged out there by 1 man and a horse and no help, and he was on his knees on the planking driving nails while the light went. 3 strokes each. He never varied it. She stood up the slope where he could not see her, and she counted, and she could not have said what she was feeling, only that her eyes stung, and the wind was not that hard. He rebuilt that bridge twice in one season. No name on it, no bill sent to the town. In February, the county would put up a notice thanking the citizens of Split Rock for their public spirit, and the citizens of Split Rock would nod at it, and not one of them would go home and add it up. Priscilla added it up. She had begun keeping a second column by then. Not what she owed him, what he was, when you put the small facts side by side. Item: he paid Verna Kittredge cash, and Verna Kittredge did not look at him the way she looked at other cash. Item: at the Mercantile in November, a man from out of town came in and shook his hand too long and called him sir twice, and said something about the quarterly, and Luther Duffy said, "See Dunphy," and the man went away satisfied. Item: the clerk at the land office, who did not stand up for the sheriff, stood up for him. Item: he wore a coat with a torn lining and drove a wagon with a cracked hub and paid 50 cents for 25 cents of mending, and there was no arithmetic in the world by which those things belonged to the same man. She did not ask. Asking was the one thing that would have made her, in her own eyes, the woman they said she was. So she watched, and she wrote nothing in a book about it, and she filed it with the other things she had no proof of. The Saturday before Christmas, her sister asked him about his mother. Children do that. There is no cruelty in it. The girl had been talking about their own mother, which she did now more freely than Priscilla could, and she turned to him with her chin on her hands and asked what his mother used to make. The room got quiet in a way Priscilla felt in her teeth. He said, "She died the night I was born. Her sister said she was sorry." He said, "No need. It was me that did it." Then he stood and took his cup to the basin and rinsed it, which he had never done before, and said the light was going, and went out to see about the horse. Priscilla sat there with the coat lining in her lap, and her needle stopped. She knew what she had just heard. She had heard a man say a thing he had said to himself so many times that it came out level, without heat, the way you say the date. It was me that did it. Not I have wondered. Not they blamed me. Just those 5 words, worn smooth as a coin, passed hand to hand for 36 years. Somebody should have told him different when he was small. Nobody had. She understood in one motion, sitting at that table, that she was looking at a man who had been let to believe the worst possible thing about himself by people who found it easier not to correct him, and that he had built a whole quiet life around not asking anyone to. She went out to the pump with a cup of water he had not asked for. He was checking a cinch that did not need checking. She held the cup out. He took it. Their fingers almost touched. Almost. She said, "My mother used to make a gingerbread with sour milk in it. It was not very good." He looked at her for a second longer than he ever had. Then he said, "I'd have eaten it." That was all. He rode down the grade, and she stood by the pump with the cold coming through her shoes, and if you had asked her that night whether anything had happened, she would have said nothing had. Another small thing she noticed the following week. Her brother came home from the Duffy place, where he had begun going Wednesdays without anyone arranging it, and he had $2 in his pocket for a half day of work that was worth 40 cents, and he was standing straighter than he had stood in a year. She let him keep it. That is its own kind of love, letting a boy of 14 believe he has earned his wage. By the end of December, the ritual had gone on 11 Saturdays. 11 bundles, 11 cups of coffee, 11 coins counted onto the table rather than into her hand. A door that clicked, a step that held, a stovepipe that drew, a woodpile squared to the wall, a pump that did not freeze, a bridge that stood twice. And in her house, 3 people who ate every day in a winter when other people did not. She thought more than once, at midnight, at the table with the lamp low, that she should be frightened of how much of her week now leaned on one man's habit. She had watched what happens when a woman's arrangements depend on somebody's kindness. Kindness is not a contract. Kindness has no column. But he had never once asked her for anything, not thanks, not explanation. Not the story of the quilt, which he must have heard, because everyone had heard. That was the thing she kept turning over. He had heard, and he had never brought it into her house. On the last Sunday in December, the new survey plats went up at the land office, and the town crowded in to see whose ground had moved. And out at the edge of town, under canvas, with a coal stove glowing and Alton Fry seated in the front row, Otis Pemberton opened his small book, ran his thumb down a page of names, and announced his text for the following week. "Unearned favor," he said. "It has a face in this town, and by God's help we will look at it." Otis Pemberton did not write the sermon in the church. He wrote it at the plank table in the back of Alton Fry's kitchen, after supper he had not paid for, with the little book open at a page he had been building since October. He crossed out 2 names. He kept one. A revival needs a face, and a face works best when it is a face everybody has already looked at sideways, so that the congregation is not asked to believe anything new, only to say out loud what it has been muttering. There was also a letter on that table, folded once, come up from somewhere south, with a printed return that Priscilla Yardley would not see for another month. It concerned leases. It concerned a quarterly. Otis Pemberton read it twice, put it in his breast pocket, and went back to his page of names. He said to Alton Fry that the Lord had shown him where to set his hand. Alton Fry said the church would be warmer than the canvas, and that he would see to it. So it was not under canvas at the edge of town. It was in the church that shared roof beams with the schoolhouse, on the first Sunday in January, with the stove roaring and every bench full, and Priscilla Yardley in the back row, where she had put herself out of 40 cents worth of old habit. He never said her name. That was the craft of it. He spoke about unearned favor for the better part of an hour, and he built it the way a man builds a fence, 1 post at a time, and he set each post where everybody could see the hole already dug. He spoke of the widow who sells what was consecrated to her by grief. He spoke of a woman who takes cash across a counter rather than settle honest paper. He spoke of provision that arrives at a door on a Saturday morning without a marriage in it, and of what a town owes itself in the way of watchfulness, and he said, mildly, kindly, that he named no one, that God knew the name, and that the guilty heart would supply it. 200 faces did not turn around. Not one of them had to. Priscilla sat with her gloves in her lap and her spine straight, and she felt the heat of the stove on her left cheek and nothing at all on her right, and she understood that she had been handed over. Inside, she was 11 years old, on a crate at a counter near a fort, adding a column while a lieutenant waited, certain of nothing in this world except that a figure is a figure. Outside, she sang the closing hymn, all 4 verses. The plate came to her row, and Alton Fry reached over her shoulder for it, and this time it took no time at all, because everyone was ready and nobody was surprised. She walked home the long way. There was nobody on it. That had been the point of the long way from the start. By Tuesday, the mending had begun to go. It did not go all at once, and no one said why. Dunphy's wife sent word by a boy that they would be doing their own for a while. A woman who had brought Priscilla curtains in November came and took the curtains back unfinished and paid for the thread only. The schoolmaster's sister, who had been sending shirts since August, crossed the street ahead of her outside the land office and looked into the window of a building that had nothing in it. Her sister, who was 11, came home from the schoolhouse on Thursday and sat on the floor by the woodbox for a long time without taking off her coat. Priscilla did not ask her what had been said. She knew the shape of it. She got the girl's coat off and put her hands around a cup of hot water with a little sugar in it and told her that people talk hardest in the winter because they are indoors. Inside, she was doing arithmetic. 4 customers gone out of 9. Flour to the middle of February, lard to the end of January. Then on Friday came the bill. Verna Kittredge's boy brought it up the grade in an envelope, which was itself an announcement, since Verna had never in 14 months put anything in an envelope. Priscilla opened it at the table. The account read $11.60. She sat looking at that figure with her coat still buttoned. The account had stood at $4.80 on the Wednesday of the quilt, and she had watched Verna Kittredge take a pencil and mark $2 off it, and she had walked out of that store owing $2.80 and had paid 90 cents against it since in 3 separate coins. Below the total, in a hand that was not Verna's, there was an addendum. Carrying charges, twice entered. Goods listed in October she had never had, and the $2 was not marked off at all. It was written in again as owing, in that same hand, with a small tidy line under it, the way a man underlines a thing he intends to read aloud later. It was not a mob, and not a notice nailed up, just a number, doubled on paper in ink. She put the bill in her book, in the crate, wrapped in the oilcloth with the rainfall, because she had learned young that the only answer to a false column is a true one kept longer. Saturday came, and this was the part that cost her. She heard the horse at the fence at 9. She had the coffee made and the good cup out, and her hand was on the latch that clicked, and she stood there with it in her hand for something like 11 seconds. Then she went out to him instead of letting him in. He was on the step with the bundle under his arm and his hat on and the snow squeaking under his boots. She did not take the bundle. She said, "I can't do your mending anymore." He waited. She said, "You have a name here. You had it before I came. There's a man in that church telling this town about favor that isn't earned, and every Saturday you write up this grade in front of 61 buildings and hand me a bundle that isn't a week's worth of work and pay me double for it. They can only make that mean one thing, and when they've finished making it mean that, it will be your name in it too." He looked down the grade a while at the town, at the smoke standing up straight from the stovepipes in the cold. He said, "Let them." She said, "No." She said it quietly, and she said it twice, and she said the part she had built and ready and had never once let out of her mouth in 11 Saturdays, which was that she would not be a thing done for, that she had sat in a back row in another state and watched what it costs a woman to be somebody's mercy, that she could carry hunger. She had carried it before. Inside, she was begging him to stand there and argue. He did not argue. He was not built to. He touched the brim of his hat, and he said, "Miss Yardley," and he went down the grade with the bundle still under his arm. She shut her own door, and it clicked, and she stood on the inside of it and put both hands flat on the wood. Another small thing she noticed, the following Saturday, which was the 12th. He did not knock. There was a bundle on the step at 9 in the morning with a coin set on top of it and boot prints turning back at the fence, and she stood at the window with her sister's arms around her waist and did not open the door. On Monday, a notice went up at the Grange Hall and at the land office in a clerk's round hand, calling the citizens of Split Rock to a meeting on the 2nd Tuesday of January on the matter of the new plats, the town lots, and the accounts of the revival subscription. Her name was on the list of those required to attend. Otis Pemberton spent the Sunday night before the storm at the plank table in the back of Alton Fry's kitchen, with the little book open and a cup at his elbow, and he did not write anything in it. He did not need to. He had done his writing. Now came the part he liked better, which was waiting. A man in his line learns that you do not have to push a person off a ledge. You only have to stand where they can see you and let the weather work. He asked Alton Fry whether the Yardley woman still had customers. Alton Fry said not many. He asked whether the account at the mercantile had been settled. Alton Fry said it had not. Then Otis Pemberton looked at the window, which had begun to rattle in its frame, and said that the Lord sends cold to bring people to the meeting. The storm came in off the northwest before daylight on Monday, and it did not let up for 2 nights and a day. Priscilla had seen weather. She had 9 years of it in her own hand, wrapped in oilcloth in a crate, and she could have told anybody who asked that the worst of it in this country comes not with noise, but with a falling glass and a sky the color of dishwater. By 7 in the morning, she could not see the fence. By noon, she could not see the pump, and the pump was 20 feet from the door. The stove drew clean, because he had wired the joint in October. The door held shut without slamming, because he had rehung the strike plate 1/2 inch lower. The woodpile squared against the north wall was the only thing between 3 people and the end of the arithmetic, and she had written it in her book as "cannot price," and now she knew the price, and it was everything. She rationed it anyway. Habit is stronger than fear. 4 sticks at a time and the damper down, and the 3 of them in the kitchen with the table pushed against the wall. The temperature came down all Monday like something being lowered on a rope. She had no thermometer. She had the water bucket, which skinned over 3 feet from the stove, and she had the nails in the ceiling boards, which went white with frost and grew fur. And she had her sister's breath standing visible over the quilt they had left, the plain one, the one nobody would have paid for. Her brother wanted to go for the cattle on the flat, because a boy of 14 who has been paid $2 for 40 cents of work believes he is somebody's hired man. She told him no. She told him the wind was going 40 miles an hour, and a person could walk past his own barn in it and never know, and that he was not going out of this house for anybody's cattle, and she said it in the voice she almost never used, and he sat down. Then she stood at the window with her hand flat on the glass and thought about a man alone on that flat with 1 horse. Inside she was praying in a plain and unlovely way with her eyes open. The second night, the wind found the roof. She heard it start, a shake lifting and setting back, then 2. Then the sound a nail makes coming out of old wood, which is not a bang, but a small complaint. And then the snow came in over the corner where her sister slept, a fine, dry sifting like flour through a sieve, and it did not stop. She got the girl out of that bed with the ticking already gone white. She moved them both into the kitchen. She got the good quilt over the girl and her own coat over that, and she stood on a chair with a hammer and a board and could do nothing at all from the inside because you cannot nail down a roof from underneath. The house shook, not the walls, the whole box of it coming up through the floor into her shoes and her knees, the same shudder she had felt once in the planks of a footbridge under somebody else's step. She sat down on the wood box and made herself count. Wood for a day and a half at 4 sticks. Flour to the middle of February, if there was a middle of February. A girl of 11 who had already sat on this floor in her coat once without taking it off. She had carried hunger before. She could carry it again, but she had never once had to sit and listen to a roof come off over a child. So what did she do? Nothing. That was the truth of it, and she never dressed it up afterward. She sat on the wood box in the dark with her arms around her sister and the lamp out to save the oil, and she waited, and she did not send her brother down the grade, and she did not go herself. At about 10 in the morning on Tuesday, with the wind still up but the snow gone fine and mean instead of blind, somebody hit the door 3 times, 3 strokes, the same count he gave a nail. He came in white to the eyebrows and put a sack on the table before he said anything at all, and behind him the pack horse and the saddle horse stood tied at the fence with their tails to the weather, and the pack horse was loaded high and lashed under canvas. She said his name. Not Mr. Duffy, not anything careful, just Luther. He said, "Roof," and went out again. He was up there the better part of 2 hours. She heard him through the boards. New shakes and no wasted motion, 3 strokes a nail, and once a long scraping while he cleared the drift off the north pitch so it would quit working the nails loose, and the sound of the house changed while she listened to it, from a thing being taken apart to a thing being held. When he came down, his hands were the color of a plucked chicken, and he could not work his fingers, and she put the basin on the stove, and he stood there and let her wrap them in a warm rag without saying that it was not necessary. Their hands were an inch apart on the rim of that basin, almost. Then he went out to the pack horse and began carrying in the rest of it. Blankets, 9 of them, gray wool, still with the fold creases in and the store smell on them, tied in 2 bundles with twine. She stood in the middle of her own kitchen and looked at them and could not think of one sensible word. He said Verna Kittredge had them on the top shelf. He said he had taken all she had. Every last blanket in the Mercantile in Split Rock, bought across the same varnished counter where a woman had unfolded a 9-patch quilt in turkey red and indigo and been told the market for used bedding was thin. He did not make a speech about it. He did not even give them to her exactly. He got the hammer and the box of tacks, and he hung them, one over the north wall from the ceiling boards down to the floor, one over the window that faced the weather, 2 across the doorway of the cold room, one on the inside of the door itself, and he did it the way a man does a chore that is overdue. And when he was finished, the kitchen was smaller and darker and 15 degrees warmer, and there were still 4 blankets folded on the table for beds. Her sister put her face against one of them and said it was scratchy. He said, "It'll get soft." The wind came back up hard in the afternoon and stayed up, and by 3 o'clock it was plain to everybody in the room that no man was riding down that grade tonight. So he stayed, in the chair by the door with his hat on and his boots on, and the boy on the floor by the stove, and the girl in the corner under wool, and Priscilla at the table with the lamp turned low because the oil had to last. That was the night she told him. She had not planned to. It came out sideways off the bill, which she had taken out of the oilcloth and put in front of him because she could not carry the shape of it alone 1 more hour. He read it. He did not comment on the total. She said, "It's wrong." Then she told him how she knew. The account stood at $4.80 on the Wednesday of the quilt. $2 was marked off in pencil in front of her. She had paid 90 cents since in 3 coins on 3 separate days, and she could name the days. Carrying charges entered twice. Goods in October she never had. And the $2 written in again as owing, in a hand that was not Verna Kittredge's. He asked how she came to have all of that by heart. And she told him about the fort. She told him about the crate she had to stand on to see over the counter, and her father weighing hay for the garrison and keeping the tally himself because nobody else would, and how the shape of an honest column had been the first thing she ever learned all the way through. Promised on one side, delivered on the other. If the 2 did not agree, one of them was a lie, and it was never the column. She told him she was 11 the first time a lieutenant took her total over his own man's, and that the clerks who had gone to schools she would never see checked her figures for a while and then stopped checking them. She told him about the other book, too. 9 years of rainfall in her own cramped hand, first frost, last frost, the day the ravine ran and the day it quit, carried 900 miles in a crate with the flour, because a person who has lost a house learns to hold on to the kind of property that cannot be sold at a counter. Then she stopped and heard how it sounded. A woman who takes in washing, telling a man she can add. She said, "I know it's nothing. I know what it is in a town like this. They think what I am is a pair of hands." He turned the bill over on the table and squared it with 2 fingers. He said, "Then you're the only one in Split Rock that can read what's coming Tuesday." No pity, no astonishment, just that. And after a while, without any change in his voice, he said the other thing. He said, "I've got a spare room, not for the winter, for as long as you want it. Bring the crate, bring both of them, and nothing you'd have to earn." She sat with her hands in her lap and did not answer, because the answer that came up first was yes, and she did not trust it. She said the room would finish what the sermon started. He said the offer would keep. He said it would keep, whether she took it this year or never. Then she said the thing she had been holding since the Saturday before Christmas, when a girl of 11 had asked him about his mother, and he had answered as level as a man saying the date. She said, "You were an hour old." He looked at the stove. She said, "You could not lift your own head. Nobody in that room did anything wrong, and you were the only one in it who did nothing at all. Somebody should have told you when you were small. They let you keep it because it was easier. It was not you that did it." He did not agree. He did not argue either. He sat there with his hat on for a long time, and then he said 36 years, and nobody ever put it that way. Another small thing she noticed. His hands in the lamplight were not steady. The wind quit some time before dawn, the way it does, all at once, so that the silence woke her. She got up and made coffee and put out the good cup. He drank one and no more. Then she took the crate out from under the bed and unwrapped the oilcloth and put the mercantile bill inside the rainfall book at the page for the 9th of December and tied the whole of it up again. It was the 2nd Tuesday of January, and her name was on the list. Otis Pemberton got to the Grange Hall a half-hour early and took the chair nearest the stove, with the little book squared on the table in front of him and the folded letter in his breast pocket. He had a way of arriving before a room so that the room seemed to arrive around him. He did not expect the Yardley woman to come. Women did not come to a thing like that after a sermon like that. He turned his cup a quarter turn and watched the door and waited for the benches to fill. She came at 10 minutes to the hour with a crate under her arm and her brother behind her carrying nothing because she would not let him. The clerk read the plats first. New lines, new lot numbers, the ravine set as the boundary it had always been in practice. Then he read the letter, which had come up from a lease company somewhere south, and the letter said that the west lots and the flat east of the ravine had failed of their yield 3 seasons running, and that a failure of that size was not weather, but management, and that the leases ought therefore to be redrawn and the accounts reopened. Then the clerk read the accounts of the revival subscription, and near the bottom of it, entered in a hand that was not Verna Kittredge's, was the name Yardley and $2 owing. Alton Fry said that explained why she had been called. Priscilla stood up and asked leave to put 2 books on the table. Nobody said she could not. The clerk moved a lamp. She opened the thinner one first and read her own account out loud, flat, the way you read a date. The way you... $4.80 on the Wednesday of the quilt. $2 marked off in pencil in front of her. 90 cents since in 3 coins on 3 days, and she named the days. Carrying charges twice entered. Goods in October she never had. Verna Kittredge went home for her own ledger and came back with it in her apron and put it beside Priscilla's. And the 2 columns agreed with each other and did not agree with the addendum, and Verna said in front of everybody that she had not written that part and had not asked for it to be written. Then Priscilla opened the other book, 9 years of rainfall in her own cramped hand. Inches, dates, first frost, last frost, the day the ravine ran and the day it quit. The land office had the county figures in a bound volume with 3 seasons missing where no one had bothered, and the clerk brought it over and they laid the two side by side and read them together, year by year, out loud, while the stove ticked. Where the county had numbers, hers matched to the 1/10 of an inch. Where the county had gaps, she had the gaps filled. And what the two books said together, when a room of about 60 people heard it, was that in 3 seasons running, this country had taken not quite half the water it needed, and that no man's management had anything to do with it. Misfortune, not dishonesty, written down 9 years before anybody needed it. Then she did the last thing, and she did it quietly with a pencil on the back of the subscription sheet. She added the hay and the wood and the oats delivered against the hay, and the wood and the oats subscribed and signed for, and she said that one column did not agree with the other by $41 and some cents, and that she did not know why, and that somebody who did should say. She never once said his name. Otis Pemberton said something about the spirit of accusation. The room had gone past him by then. He looked at her across that table and saw for the first time exactly what he had picked out of a crowd in October, and something in his face came loose and did not set back. Luther Duffy stood up at the wall with his hat on and said the flat east of the ravine was his, and the town lots were his, and had been his grandfather's, and that Dunphy's collected the leases and always had, and that no lease in Split Rock was being redrawn. He sat down again. Nobody had ever heard him say 5 sentences in a row. Otis Pemberton finished his season. The benches thinned. He was whispered about at the suppers where he had done his own whispering, and he kept his name and his notebook and went on south in the spring, and by then nobody cared. The clerk sent a slip up the grade in April in his round hand. The county asks Miss P. Yardley to keep the rainfall record for the district at $6 the year. She read it twice at her own table, in a kitchen with wool still tacked over the north wall. I have had a seat bought for me exactly once in my life, and I did not have to earn it. He said there was a spare room. He said nothing I'd have to earn. And the strange part, the part I still turn over, is that it was true. The ravine ran loud that April, the way it always did, and she wrote the day it started in her own hand, because now the county paid her $6 a year to do what she had done for nothing for 9 years. The bridge held. New stringers, new rail, no name on it. She moved in the last week of March, and it was not a decision so much as the end of arguing with herself. Her brother carried the flour. Her sister carried the good cup, wrapped in a shirt, with both hands all the way down the grade and across the planks. Priscilla carried the crate. The room was on the north side, small, with one window that looked at the flat. He had put a shelf up in it before she came, boards planed smooth, and every nail driven with 3 strokes. The shelf was 3 feet long and exactly deep enough for a crate. She set the rainfall book on it and untied the oilcloth and did not wrap it back up. That was the whole of it. No ceremony, no word said about what the town would make of it, though the town made something for about a month and then found other things. Verna Kittredge sent up a bolt of unbleached muslin in May and marked it paid. He asked nothing. That never changed. He came in at dinner with his hat on and took it off at the table now, which was new, and he said her name once a day and rationed it the same as before. Miss Yardley in the doorway. She let it stand. There was time. The blankets stayed tacked over the north wall of the old kitchen, because she had not gone back up the grade to take them down, and because a house that has been made warm once ought to be left that way for whoever comes next. Another small thing she noticed, that spring. She had stopped keeping the column of what she owed him, not from carelessness. She had gone to write in it one night in April and found that the thing she was trying to price was not a debt, and she closed the book and put it on the shelf he built. And on a Saturday in May, at the table, He counted out 50 cents in coin, the way he always had, and pushed it across, and she put her hand flat over it before it got to her side. Not into her hand, not onto the table. Just her palm over his coins, and his fingers still there, and neither of them moving for the space of about 3 seconds. Then she took the money and said, "You'll need to quit tearing your own coat." He said, "I know it." The second slip came in June, in the same round clerk's hand. The county wanted her to say whether the 3 missing seasons could be certified from a private record, and whether she would swear to it, and whether she would come down to the land office counter and sign. She read it twice at her own table, in a house east of the ravine, with the window open on the flat and the smell of cut hay coming in. She turned it around so he could see it, and put one finger on the line about swearing to it and said, "Here's what we do. When I think about them, I do not think about the Grange Hall, or the letter, or the man who never said her name from the pulpit and lost his benches anyway. I think about a shelf 3 feet long, planed smooth, put up in a room before she ever agreed to sleep in it, with nothing on it yet, waiting for a crate that had been carried 900 miles and never once unpacked. He said there was a spare room and nothing she'd have to earn. And the strange part, the part I still turn over, is that it was true. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're listening from and what moment touched you most. If you'd like more quiet evenings by the fire, lonely roads, quiet cowboys, and hearts finding their way home, come back for the next one. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next one will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for staying to the very end. I will see you in the next one.